Okay, guys, so this is going to be a little bit different because with this particular chapter, I kind of write on the board a lot when I'm explaining. And what that's going to mean for y'all is that I'm going to have to switch back and forth between PowerPoints. So don't freak out. It's me doing it. It's just I need to have some extra space. So when we talked about the nervous system, when we talked about the muscular system, both of them kind of started out with more of a microanatomy, microphysiology viewpoint. We were looking at how the cells worked and how they kind of communicated with each other. With the endocrine system, we're kind of going to do the same thing. Chapter 17 and 18 are both endocrine system, but chapter 17, again, is kind of that microanatomy, microphysiology. How do the cells work together? How do they communicate? And then 18 is, here are the organs, here are the hormones that they produce, and this is why they produce them and what those hormones do. So with that in mind, know that 17 and 18 are the same system. It's just kind of different focus where we're looking. So chapter 17 is the functional organization of the endocrine system. Here's the general outline of the chapter. So, general characteristics of the endocrine system. In Greek, endo means within, crino means to secrete. Hormone, that word actually means to set in motion. In AP1, we talked about the fact way back in chapter 1 that we have two systems that are responsible for being regulatory in the body and basically regulating our body's processes. Push comes to shove, endocrine system is one of the two. Nervous system is the other. So our endocrine system works very differently, and we're going to talk about that. But ultimately, when it releases its hormones, it's setting something in motion. It's actually causing a reaction to happen. So the endocrine system itself is composed of, oddly enough, endocrine glands. They typically secrete chemical signals called hormones, and they secrete them into the cardiovascular system. So endo is referring to the fact that we're making a product, but we're actually secreting it inside the body. You've got other glands called exocrine glands, exo meaning exit. Your sweat glands are a good example of that. You don't sweat into your bloodstream, you sweat onto a surface. Your oil glands are another good example of that. Again, you don't sweat onto how do I put it? You don't sweat into your bloodstream, you sweat onto a surface. That's why I have oily skin. So what is it about hormones that makes them unique? One, they're produced by in small amounts by a specific collection of cells. You don't see hormones being secreted everywhere by every cell in your body. Usually, it's one gland with a specific subset of cells that make a specific hormone. They're secreted into interstitial spaces. In between. Stitial is tissue. So remember I said they're put into the blood. Well, when you first secrete hormones, they kind of go in between the cells and then the blood picks them up, almost like you're waiting at a bus stop and the bus comes and picks you up. So what that means is they enter the cardiovascular system, and that's where they're transported some distance. So this is kind of another thing. With hormones, they are made in one place in the body, and they may work in a completely different area. Way back in AP1, I know I keep going back to it, but that's why there's a part 1 and a part 2. We talked about a woman being in labor, and we said when a woman is in labor, she releases oxytocin, and oxytocin goes to the uterus, and it causes the uterus to contract. Okay. So let's talk about that. Oxytocin is released from a gland in the brain, the posterior pituitary. That area from your brain all the way down to your pelvis where your uterus is a huge distance for something that is atomic in structure to travel. That's why we say some distance. It's not like it's right next door. Your brain isn't right next to your uterus, okay? Now, this is something else that's real specific to hormones. It acts on specific tissues, what we call target tissues, okay, at another site in the body to influence the activity of these tissues in some specific fashion. So let's go back to the oxytocin example. Oxytocin is causing the smooth muscle in the uterus to contract. Where is there smooth muscle in your body? Almost everywhere. It's in your skin, it's in your intestine, it's in your stomach, it's in your esophagus, it's in your trachea, it's in your bronchioles, it's in your eyes. It's everywhere. Yet, none of those things contract. The only thing that contracts is the uterus, right? The reason that is because the only thing the hormone binds to, the only thing that actually has a receptor for oxytocin is the uterus, meaning that oxytocin can travel everywhere in the whole body and never touch anything else because nobody else has the right receptor. It would be like me putting oxytocin into a male body. Oxytocin receptors are found on the uterus. Oxytocin would be floating around a male's body going, yeah, I don't see any receptors that I recognize. You don't have the receptor, you don't respond. This is one of the ways that we ensure that the only thing responding is this target tissue, because the target tissue is the only one with the right receptor. So, I told you guys we had two regulatory systems in the body, the endocrine system and the nervous system. So, let's talk about them. Both of them do regulate activities of structures in the body. How they do it is different. They also do have an intimate relationship. They do influence each other. Back in the day when, we were kind of first discovering how things worked, a lot of people just assumed that this system was over here and that system was over there, and they didn't influence each other. But we've really come to realize that, yeah, they do. There is a huge amount of interaction between them. So in the endocrine system, the things that we release are called hormones. Hormones are amplitude-modulated signals. So what does that mean? It's concentration dependent. If you decrease or increase the concentration of hormones in body fluids over time, you see differences in how the body responds. Now, increases and decreases in the body fluids for hormones can range from minutes, it can range to hours. That difference in hormone levels isn't like instantaneous, poof, you have ginormous amounts of hormone. It literally takes a little bit of time. Now, something else with the endocrine system. The responses are decreased or increased, like I said, based on concentration. So that amplitude modulated that I'm talking about, how much hormone is present. For people who have insulin-resistant diabetes, they have to take insulin shots. And one of the reasons that they have to take insulin shots is because their body doesn't recognize a regular concentration, okay? Now let's talk nervous system. So let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk over here, okay? Nervous system is kind of an all or none thing. You've got all or none action potentials carried along axons that can be described as frequency modulated. Every neuron, when it fires the exact same way. You can make it fire more often, but it's not like you get a bigger signal or a smaller signal. It's always the same. When I'm talking about this in AMP1, I describe firing a gun. It doesn't matter if you pull the trigger soft or you pull the trigger harder. If you pull the trigger softer, it's not like it goes boo and it falls out of the end of the gun. The gun is going to fire that bullet the same speed as if you pull the trigger normally. By the same token, if I pull the trigger harder, it's not like the bullet's going to fly out of the gun harder than it would have if I would have just barely touched the trigger enough to get it to fire. So that all or none that I'm talking about is the fact that you've got that it's going to fire the same way every time. Now, how frequently it fires may vary. So when we talk about, let me move that out of the way, hang on. When we talk about how do we get the nervous system to send more signal or send a bigger signal, we talk about how many times we fire that neuron. How frequent does it happen? So again, it's frequency, not amplitude. It's not about the amount of chemical. It's about how many times we get the neuron to fire. If we have low frequency, it is a weak stimulus. If we have high frequency, it is going to be a very strong stimulus. Now, this is something else that's different. If you look over here, we mentioned that for the endocrine system, we have periods of minutes to hours of effect, right? Here, it's a few milliseconds. 1 to a few milliseconds. So it's 1,000th of a second, or maybe 3,000ths of a second, but it isn't minutes, it isn't hour, it isn't even a second, okay? And normally with your nervous system, it's going to be a local action. It's going to be at your toe. It's going to be at your finger. The nerve fires at your finger. The nerve fires at your toe. If you stub your toe, that neuron is firing at your toe. With your endocrine system, like I said, something could be released from your brain that is affecting a completely different part of your body. Now, this is science, right? What does that mean? There are always exceptions. Now, we are not going to talk about the exceptions, but keep that in mind if somebody comes up with, well, yes, but, well, probably. Somebody can probably come up with a yes, but answer. But when it comes down to it, if we're talking just in generalization, this is how these two regulatory systems of our body work. So let's talk about the different kinds of signals, okay? These are interchemical signals. What does inter mean? Remember, I've always told you guys, if you can learn prefixes and suffixes, it helps you to understand the words and you can cheat. So inter means between, okay? So between the cells, chemical signals, intercellular. It allows one cell to communicate with another. It coordinates and regulates the activities of most of the cells in the body. Neurotransmitters and neuromodulators play really essential roles in the function of the nervous system. And hormones, like I said before, are secreted by the endocrine system. So let's talk about the different intercellular chemical signals. We've got autocrine signals, we've got paracrine signals, hormones, neurohormones, which are just hormones. Neurotransmitters, I'll explain why that's called that in a minute with the neurohormones, and then pheromones. So, autocrine signals. They're secreted by cells in a local area and influence the activity of the same cell type which it was secreted by. So, let's say that we are all pancreas cells. Okay, everybody in the room is a pancreas cell, right? And I secrete the hormone somatostatin. Okay, somatostatin goes and affects other pancreas cells. Literally, I'm just going to the same cell like me and saying, hey, so you need to do this. That's an autocrine signal. It's literally just affecting the same cell that I am. That's why it's auto, because auto means self. Okay? Now, paracrine signals. Para basically means side by side. Think of the word parallel. Okay? So it's produced by a wide variety of tissues and they're secreted into tissue spaces, but usually the effects are localized on others. So in other words, I'll say liver. My next door neighbor, if I'm the liver, is the gallbladder. Okay. So let's say the liver cells secrete something that affects the gallbladder. I'm literally affecting my neighboring cells. I'm not going throughout the body. I'm not traveling through the blood. I'm just going from here to there, but it's not the same cell type as I am. That's a paracrine chemical signal. I'm literally going to my neighbor and saying, hey, this is the effect I want to have. Hormones. We just talked about this. These are secreted into the blood by a very specific subset of cells. They travel some distance in the body to a target tissue, and that hormone influences the activity of the target. Now, what's the difference between these? Well, one, autocrine only affects the same cell type. Paracrine only goes from point A to right next door, let's say point A1, to influence cells. Hormones can go from Kingsville to Corpus. There's a distance between where I'm releasing this chemical and where the cells that are getting affected are. Now, hormones are secreted by endocrine tissue. That's another big thing. Hormones are secreted by endocrine tissue. So let's continue. Neurohormones, also known as a hormone. Okay. They work the exact same way as the hormone that we just talked about. They're secreted by a specific set of cells. They travel a long distance and they affect something else. Here's the difference. Remember, I said that with the hormones, it's secreted by endocrine tissue. Neurohormones are produced by neurons. So even though they function just like a hormone, instead of being produced by, let's say, the pancreas, they're produced by a neuron somewhere, okay? Usually when we talk about neurohormones, we're talking about things that are produced in the brain and then travel a distance. Oxytocin is actually one of these neurohormones. It's secreted by neurons, but it travels from the brain all the way down to the pelvis. So, number 5, the neurotransmitter, really? Neurotransmitter or neuromodulator. These are also produced by hormones, and they're secreted into the extracellular space, in other words, that space outside of the cell, by a presynaptic terminal. Hang on, I gotta move this thing again. Sorry, guys. I got to get to my different colors. All right, let's do blue. This presynaptic terminal, the postsynaptic cell, if you'll remember that from AP1, there's the synaptic cleft in between here, that space. With a neurotransmitter, it's produced by neurons. It's secreted into this space here, okay? Travels that short distance to the next cell. Neurotransmitters aren't going any long distances anywhere. It's literally go from this cell to that cell, the end. Presynaptic to postsynaptic, you're done. Okay, pheromones. Pheromones are kind of interesting. I'm going to read the definition and then we'll talk about it. They're secreted into the environment. They modify the physiology and behavior of other individuals in the same species. So you've seen this before, even though if you think, I've never, yeah, you have. If you live in anywhere in Texas, you've seen this. Cats or dogs go into heat. It's the female of the species that goes into heat, right? And what happens? All these other cats are all, hey, and she's like, no, what's up, right? Okay, what's happening is the female, for the sake of argument, let's say that this is the female, is secreting chemicals like this that are going into the air. And as they go into the air, the male's brain picks up on it and goes, hey, she's fertile. She's ready to have babies. So I need to fertilize those eggs. It actually is a chemical reaction, and it is intercellular. It's just not within the same person. The female cat is causing the behavior of the male cat to change. It's actually altering their brain chemistry, making them come over and go sub, because it's actually an intercellular chemical signal. It's a chemical signal that changes the thinking of the male to go, hey, I need to go and get with this cat because I need to spread my genetic information in the world. Do we have these? No. No one has ever been able to actually scientifically prove and give evidence of human pheromones. Yeah, they've been able to say women like this smell better than that smell or whatever, but they've never actually been able to show scientifically that it alters any behaviors other than I like that smell instead of that smell. So that's kind of interesting. Okay.